and welcome to another episode of The Corner Gallery. On today's episode, we will be talking with David Yates, who is a paint extraordinaire. He has some beautiful paintings with him today, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what influences his artwork, as well as what goes into making these pieces. David, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, David, tell me a little bit about yourself, just to start off.
Well, I am born and raised in Edwardsville, and I've lived there my entire life. And I'm a graduate of SIU. My degree is actually in drawing, but about 15, 20 years ago, I decided I wanted to start painting.
Oh, okay. All right. So, David, what made you decide to make that switch? They're not very different. They're still in that same kind of atmosphere, I guess you would say, but what made you decide to transfer over to doing more paint work?
Well, this is actually an interesting story because this whole series of paintings that you see behind you was based on a very simple idea. Mm-hmm. One day I happened to be hiking out in the woods and I saw this tiny little bird. And I thought to myself, well, I'd like to make a painting of that as compared to a drawing.
Right.
But then the notion came to me about making the painting extremely large so that you're taking something that was 2 or 3 inches in size and then putting it up on the scale of like what you would normally see in an art gallery for like a nobility or a bank president or somebody of importance, mm-hmm. That was affluential. And I found that was kind of a comic approach to taking this little big bird and making it into something much bigger than it really was.
And I noticed that looking over some of your paintings before we actually were able to meet, that each one of them had a bird. So do you always start with maybe the bird you want to use and then figure out everything else? Like how does the process work?
Well, there's not really one set way of doing things. I mean, sometimes I'll just think of a bird that I want to use in a painting, and but a lot of times the ideas come from just things that happen in my everyday life or things that I hear on the radio or something that just kind of sparks an idea, and then over the course of time the idea just keeps developing and developing.
Got you. So with this one over your shoulder, for example, and what is this called?
Wren, Lose or Draw.
Wren, Lose or Draw.
Yeah.
So tell me about this painting. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I see the SIUE. Mm-hmm. I see cardinals. Tell me about some of the components and what made you decide to put those things in there.
Okay. This painting is actually about the influence that a parent and our environments have on your children. My son's name is actually Wren. That's his middle name, so we call him by Wren. Mm-hmm. And the thought behind the painting was that all the things that I like, are things that you end up sharing with your children and stuff, and you want them to like it too in one way or another. It does influence the way that they think and see things. That being said, we also as parents have baggage and stuff that we carry with us. So on the back side of this side of the painting, there is some of the negative things that I've had in my life. That I represented or used the piasaw bird kind of to represent some of the the demons that I've had in my past. Mm-hmm. And you can also see that there's a liquor bottle and stuff there. So there's some of the negative things that that we go through as we grow up that are part of your lives. Right. And then so all the things that are on the back wall are the things that I enjoy and I like and I want to share with my son. And then the things that are up in the foreground are things that I really kind of wish that I was better at, that that you want him, you want your children to be better than you, better people, than you were. And so, I want his life to be more comfortable, and I want him to, always go in the right direction, and maybe even have a little more spirituality than I had growing up.
Oh, that's great. And now that you have broken that down for me a little more, it makes so much sense. Because the first thing I noticed when I saw this painting, aside from the bird, was the nut doesn't fall too far. So that makes sense now.
Yeah, because that's, we always talk about your kids not being much different than their parents and stuff, which I feel sorry for him because of that.
And then having the bottle in the background, so that the perspective that I get from that now makes a lot of sense. So something that I'm really interested in is how are you able to do such straight lines? I know when I'm painting, I try, but it's not very easy to keep them so straight. How do you do it?
Painter's tape. I mean, a lot of times, when I'm doing the original drawing and stuff, I'm using a straight edge and
Gotcha.
and doing actual measurements and stuff. So there's actually math involved. Most people don't think that most artists would use math, but that's one thing that I use quite a bit when I'm preparing and creating the designs. But then I will use painter's tape and stuff like that, especially if I want a nice hard edge.
Right. So you have drafts for these paintings. You draw them out first.
Yeah, I come up with the ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long does that usually take you? Do you go through a couple of drafts and decide, I think I like it this way better? Or do you pretty much have in your mind what you want, get that drawn out and say, all right, let's get to painting? No,
most of the time, usually what happens is that when the idea first comes to me, then I start kicking around about like some of the different elements and really what I want the painting to try to say. And so a lot of times the elements that I'm going to incorporate, are things that I kind of think about and change my mind and it's not anything set in concrete in the first phases of everything.
Right.
There's a lot more, thinking involved before I ever go to any kind of paper or any or even start looking at images on the computer or whatever I might decide how to create the piece. The actual easiest part is the actual technical painting, because by the time that I get to that point, I already know how I want everything to look. So that's just a matter of executing, the technical part of things.
Right. So I also notice one of the things I really love about your paintings is the bright and vibrant colors. How do you come up with the color palette?
Now that's one of the things that over the course of time has kind of progressed, where when I first initially started doing these have evolved, a lot over the course of the last 15 years. And my color palette to start with was very, very basic, where there was a lot of, one of my former instructors always said, the red, yellow, and blue
Right.
primary kind of palette, where everything was very bright and colorful, because I wanted everything to I wanted to put it like that everything was a little bit where I wasn't taking things too seriously.
Right.
But as time went on, the palette started getting more and more select, in that I found that you could still incorporate humor in the pieces without making it looking clown-like or cartoon-like. So.
And you do a very good job of that. There's some little funny things I noticed in some of the other paintings that we have in the Boyle Art Gallery. And like you said, you do a great job of putting those elements in there without it at any point looking wonky or goofy. It's still very nicely done.
Well, one of the things that I want to do is that I want to be able to make, the comments and talk about things that are important to me, but I don't want to take myself too seriously when I'm doing these.
Gotcha.
I think that it's important that the artwork reflects the personality of the artist, and the people that know me know that I like to kid around and joke around a lot, and so I think it's important to incorporate my sense of humor in along with my other perspectives on more serious matters.
Gotcha. Okay, so on to this one. What is this one called?
The American Civil Warbler.
The American Civil Warbler. Now tell us about this one. You've got a lot going on. The first thing I noticed is Quick Trip. Obviously that's a standout here in the Midwest. We all know about Quick Trip. But tell me about some of the other components we see here.
Well, now this one actually was done in the wake of the Michael Brown shooting.
Okay.
The Quick Trip, was really associated with a lot of the imagery that we were seeing on the television at the time. And if you notice that the price of the gas was the day that Michael Brown actually was shot.
Gotcha.
So most people won't notice some of the details of something like that.
Right.
That the price of the gas was a lot more expensive than what we would normally pay. But it was just a reminder of that date. The painting itself, like I said, I think that was one of the ones where you still you want to make a comment about what's occurring, but at the same time, I always kind of look at myself, like I said, I take things a little bit lighthearted, and when I say that is that I realize that I'm an artist with, and I got something to say, But my opinion doesn't really make any more difference than somebody else that can't draw, or or the way that they want to explain things. It's just a way that you express your ideas,
Right.
and your comments on things.
And I remember looking at this before we got started today and thinking, 809, and I didn't even think about asking you about the relevance of that, but now that makes a lot more sense. And I see, okay, here we've got a cigar, so that also ties into that there. So what about the bird selection in this one?
The bird in here was a black and white warbler. And the reason I selected that particular bird was because, obviously there was a lot of racial tension that was, that came out of the Michael Brown shooting. And it seemed like that there was, there was battle lines kind of being drawn,
Right.
Where people were siding, with things that they thought. And so I wanted to pick a bird that represented both sides of that.
Got you. And then just two other things I noticed here. You've got the thread and the needle, as well as the chess piece. How do those tie into that also?
Well, the thread and the needle, a lot of times in my paintings, I try to put images in that are left up to people's interpretation, so they may have more than one meaning. With the needle and thread, I remember seeing spray painted on one of the buildings during the Ferguson incident that snitches get stitches. And then, but also I look at the needle and thread as something that was also used to repair things. So I was looking at it as that, something like this that is so negative, that positive things can come out of it, and that's what we should, we should be looking to do.
Gotcha.
And like and two, on like for example on the brick there, well, I could have put Michael Brown's initials on it, but I put the junior on there because I think that then it makes it where we look at it as if it was our own children, that the junior represents your kids, not just one individual, but your kids, if that happened to your family.
Right. So you find elements to really make these paintings hit home.
Right. Yeah, and I know you asked about the chess piece. Well, I've always, I grew up where we thought that the police were the white knights, that, and a lot of times that's how they are portrayed and that's what they're supposed to be. But if you look at the face that I put on the white knight, you can't tell if it's, it's a little ambiguous in the way that it looks, so that appearances are not always what they seem.
Gotcha. Wow, these things are really deep. Like I said, just looking at them, you think they're really interesting, and you wonder kind of what's going on, but I never would have thought when I had you actually break it down for me that these would be so deep.
Well, one of the big things about studio art, though, is that most of the time you're not going to be there to talk to the artist, to get the full meaning behind it. And I think that it's also very important that the stories and the elements are interpreted by the viewer, so that they take the content and they form their own stories about it, because that may be much more interesting to you than what the artist's intent was.
Gotcha. Okay, so one of my other questions too, you just have huge canvases. None of the paintings I've seen from you are smaller. How long does it take to paint something this big with so many colors and so many elements? How long does this usually take you?
Well, I got to admit that when I go into the studio, I don't punch a time clock. I never look at that because, it's something that you enjoy. So, some things will go smoothly the whole time, and other things may take months to do. But really, a lot of times, the creative process is much more time, uses a lot more time than the technical aspect of it. As I said earlier, that once I actually have everything drawn on the canvas and the design made and stuff, the painting part is really the easiest part, because I kind of look at each painting comprises of two big elements. It's kind of the creative aspect of it and the technical aspect, or basically what you're drawing or painting and how you paint it.
Right.
And so for me, the important part is the creative aspect of it, because I found that if I do the designs right, then no matter how the elements are juxtaposed with one another, there's a balance that you try to create, what makes it, visually, aesthetically pleasing.
Right. And just speaking of the way you notice things, a little bit before the show we talked about how some things have a little more depth than others. How are you able to create that, especially when there's no real perspective of it? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I borrow a lot of work from different art history. I mean, I look at a lot of different types of movements, and for example, the lack of perspective is one of the traits of Cubism, but one of the earliest forms of painting, if you go back to the Renaissance, they have something what's called Renaissance spacing, and that's where they put something in the in the foreground that's very concise,
right.
And then there's a middle ground, and then they have a background. And what they do, that's creating the sense of depth because you've got things on, in different layers on there.
Right.
So if you think of things being broken down into layers, it creates that feeling of depth, even though there's a lack of perspective on the pieces.
How often are you able to get these done? You say you don't really keep track of how long they take you, but how often do you try to do these? Is it just every now and then you feel a spark of painting? Or?
Well, sometimes it depends on the motivation. For example, like if I see a show that I would like to enter, I try to enter a lot of juried shows around the St. Louis area.
Okay.
And some of them have themes and stuff, and some of them are invitationals where they people invite you to do work. And I find that sometimes when I have a tighter deadline, I'm more apt to start working quickly and try to get into the studio every night. And then there's other times where it's good to just kind of take a rest, take a step back, look at what you've done recently, find out what you like about it. And I'm one of the things I like to do to myself all the time is ask myself, if I was going to do this again, what would I do differently, and then why?
Right. Okay. So I will get into some of the exhibits and things that you've been featured in because I do want to know about that. But just one last thing about the painting process. How do you choose the birds? Do you do a lot of research on the bird and then decide this is how I want it featured in this piece? How do you choose?
Well, when I first started painting the birds, I was actually working towards my BFA degree at SIU, and part of for the degree, I had to have my own show. And one day I started sitting down and looking through all my work and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I realized that some of my stronger pieces had birds in them. And so I decided, well, okay, if I keep the central theme the same, then I will be able to do printmaking and drawing and other different media to experiment with, but it would be cohesive just because of the central theme being the same. But what I found was that the more that I started doing birds, then it also started leading me to where I started doing bird watching, and then that led into bird photography and stuff, where I started doing nature photography because I started taking pictures to use as kind of references for the paintings and stuff like that. So the initial paintings and stuff, there was a lot of the birds that I had actually seen in nature were the ones that were influencing me, and that's still, I very rarely will put in birds that I haven't seen in nature unless it's just something that cries that that you need to have I mean, it's not very convenient for me to go to Antarctica to to do if I want to really need a penguin in a piece or something like that. So, but most of the time I try to choose birds that I've seen in nature, and then they have a direct correlation with what the piece is about. For example, my son's name's Wren, so that's a Carolina wren here, and the warbler in the painting in the aftermath of the Michael Brown shooting. Well, I felt that it needed to be black and white, and the black and white warbler was a perfect choice for that because they are a bird that is indigenous to the area as a transient. They come through during the migration, so you can see them here, but they're not like year-round members.
Right. Wow. That is. Because I noticed all the birds in the different paintings, and one of the first things I was thinking was, how does he come up with these, and how does he decide where to place them? What do they have to do with the painting?
Yeah.
So now to understand how much research kind of goes into it, how much thought, and the fact that you are a bird enthusiast now.
Yeah, I mean, it just kept expanding. Where I was starting to go out and bird watch, on a regular basis. There's a nature center near my home, and I would go out there once or twice a week, with a camera in tow, and go out and take pictures. But then, start being more familiar not only with the birds that are indigenous to the area, but also the flora, the rest of the flora and the fauna too. And I would incorporate those things in the paintings a lot of times too.
Gotcha.
So it gives us a lot of the, it puts my Midwestern heritage in the paintings too, where it
Right.
kind of personalizes things.
Got you. Obviously, here at Lindenwood, we're featuring your art right now in our art gallery. So where are some of the other places you've been featured? You touched on it a little bit earlier.
Well, most of the work and stuff that I've done has been in local areas. There's the Foundry Arts Center here in St. Charles has been.
Okay, right.
I really like entering the jury type of shows, and for me that's always a challenge, and it's fun because as much as that I would paint no matter what the if you got any kind of awards or anything like that, there's still something that's satisfying and gratifying about having your peers think that your work is worthy enough to be included in shows. It's just confirmation that the things the decisions that you're making, are also appreciated by other artists.
Right. Okay, so have you won any awards for some of these paintings? Talk about some of the awards you have won.
I've won a few awards. One of the nice things that I've been featured in, I've won a couple of awards of excellence at Art St. Louis, which is one of the art organizations here in St. Louis, and that is downtown. And the thing that I like about the awards of excellence, being part of that, is that it automatically gives you an invitation to what they call the honor show.
Right.
And the honor show is that all the award winners from that year are invited to submit work to this another show. And a lot of times there'll be like 25 artists that are invited, and then you have to submit your work, and then they'll have another juror come in, whether it's an art historian or a professor of painting or whatever it may be, an authority will narrow that down to include 10 artists. So, to be included in that group of people where, they're telling you that you're good, but then you get to also be included in that you're the good of the good.
Right.
And you don't want to sound egotistical about it. It's very humbling. I'm getting to do what I like to do. And so to get any kind of recognition whatsoever is kind of like, just gravy on things, because one of the first things that I realized when I won the first award of excellence and when I was invited to the honor show, that I really wanted to get in that show. I really wanted to be invited to be the honors part. But after I got working on about the second or third painting, my whole attitude changed about whether I got in or not, because it became less and less important because I was happy with the work I was producing. So, like I said, the recognition and everything was fine, and it's gratifying. But if I found that it was much more important to just be producing the work that I was happy with it, and thought that it was something that I was proud of, and I thought that it was something that where I was being able to express myself creatively and put my feelings on paint and canvas, and those kind of things I think were much more important than any of the awards that you can get.
Right.
And if other people like your stuff, great, but that's not the motivation behind being creative.
So with your paintings, have you ever sold them or auctioned them off? What do you typically do with these?
Well, my wife wants to know, what am I supposed to do with all this crap when I die? That's her main question. I have a lot of them because this series, like I said, the series of these big paintings have been going on for about 17 years. So I bet that I probably have, maybe 70 of them at home right now. But they've changed so much. It's that constantly, that constant you're only as good as your last piece kind of thing. So your portfolio is constantly changing. So, things that I thought were good a year ago, well, they're no longer being shown anywhere because, I don't think it's my best work anymore. I don't think that I've hit my pinnacle of creativity and honed my technical skills yet to the point of where, I want to be.
Wow.
So, and I mean, yeah, you do sell some stuff, but, most people are not going to spontaneously buy paintings this big, because they don't fit over the couch.
Right.
And also the price tag on it is usually priced so that, when they're at, galleries, that the galleries always get a commission and stuff like that. And, and you have to price things accordingly, because of the, the materials, the cost.
Of course.
Everything. And I don't know that, most galleries can go anywhere from 30 to 50% on the commission. But, they earn it because they're getting out and showing your work and presenting it to people.
Right.
Making the contacts for you. I don't really want a bunch of people wandering through my basement,
Of course.
watching me paint, and, so to have, the organizations like the Art St. Louis or the Foundry in St. Charles, them doing the work and stuff of promoting and having shows and stuff like that is a great opportunity for all artists.
Okay. So with you painting these so long, you've got, I imagine, a billion paintings. Is there any way that people can see these and keep up with them? Do you have any type of website?
Yeah, I have a website. It's davidmyates.com. And really on the website, I do have like most of my recent ones, and I kind of whittled down the number I had on there because on my old website I had, it seemed like hundreds of different images, and now I kind of went to where it's more important to have, just one of the, some of the pieces that are the more recent ones that you're proud of and that you want to show off that you're currently on, kind of on display.
Got you. So you touched on a little bit earlier, saying a gratifying part is knowing that people do want to see these things, they do care about them. What would you say is probably the most gratifying part of painting these over such a long span of time?
Well, that's really kind of hard to say, but I mean, I knew from the time that I was just a little boy that I wanted to be an artist. That's all I've ever wanted to be in my life. And even through times of, gaps of not creating and painting, I realized that there was a gap or a hole in me that, where I didn't feel like that I was living up to my full potential. And the one nice thing about art is that if your dream is to be an artist, that's something that you can carry throughout your life. Where, if I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player, I'm a little bit too old for that now.
Right.
But, the thing about an artist is that if you don't give up and keep, practicing your craft and really believing in yourself and sticking to your guns, that's something that, like I said, that you can do it till the day that you die. And that's a great thing for me, like I said, because, without it, I just felt that there was something missing. It's kind of hard to describe, but like I said, there was just something that I felt like that I was supposed to be doing that wasn't there when I wasn't making art.
Well, David, that is unfortunately all the time we have today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks.
I thoroughly enjoyed it and look forward to seeing your work at the gallery. That is all for today's episode of The Corner Gallery. And again, special thanks to David for joining us today, as well as John Troy for helping us coordinate this episode. We hope to see you next time.